Good evening, everyone. I'm Father Dragos Șerescu. I'm the principal of the Institute here in Cambridge. I just wanted to offer a very short but warm welcome to you all this evening. And just to say how delighted I am that we can host this conference this evening, this meeting this evening on this very important topic of the environment, of our attitude, or our theology, and how our theology is connected to our practical lives as Orthodox Christians in relation to the environment. And I just want to commend Elizabeth for initiating this event, our very own Dr. Elizabeth Theokritoff, and really for asking this very important question, which stands as the topic of this evening's event. What has climate change to do with Orthodoxy? And I think it's a very pertinent question. I'm sure that our panel this evening will be able to deal with this question in a pertinent way and in an informing way. But really, I think we have to face the problem that most Orthodox have, that environmental issues are very much not central to our understanding of our lives as Christians today, I think, and hopefully we will be able to sort of catch up a little bit with the rest of the world, and indeed with the rest of other Christians who have addressed this and made this much more of an active topic in their daily lives and in the lives of their churches. So this was all I wanted to say, really, and to welcome you all and to wish everyone to benefit from this evening. And I'm sure that the recording will be available soon after this event on the Institute's YouTube channel. We can find other relevant videos from our past conferences. So thank you all for attending, and over to you, Elizabeth and Rizwan.
Thank you very much, Father Dragos. This is obviously a very topical subject. Everybody's talking about climate change, and now that the COP26 talking and pledging has ended, it's time, well, it's high time to be thinking about action. And for us as Orthodox Christians, this is action to avert and limit harm to our suffering neighbor. It's also action that reflects the dignity and value of the earth and other creatures as God's creation. And I think we have to be aware that valuing the earth as carbon sinks and ecosystem services doesn't necessarily solve the underlying problem of seeing other creatures solely in terms of human material needs. So there are theological questions that remain highly relevant, and this needs to be taught. We need to make the connection between our theological teaching on thinking on the subject and our action. And our action needs to be of the way we live out our theology at this particular time, and also a witness to our faith. And it's very important to have that witness, not least for our own young people in the church who might be considerably more interested and committed to doing something about climate change and the environment than they are to things more obviously to do with, more obviously churchy. It's an opportunity to create a bridge. And action is required obviously at various levels. At the level of church communities, how, what they say and also how they organize themselves. At the private level of the sorts of decisions we make every day, what we eat, what we buy, travel, and so forth. But it's frequently pointed out that the crisis isn't going to be soluble just on an individual level, everyone changing their light bulbs, but at the same time, large-scale changes by governments, business, industry, and so forth. None of these will happen without public support, and we are also the public. We're used to the idea of our home life as a microcosm of the church. We're much less familiar with the idea of church members as a leaven in society, in public space. And it's therefore a great joy to have this panel exceptionally well placed to help us break this barrier between faith and action, including action in the public sphere. And our first speaker, Costa Carras, is someone who has really spent a lifetime thinking what it means to be an Orthodox Christian in the public sphere, and indeed exemplifying it, not least by his part in originally sparking the interest in environment in Constantinople. I'm not going to introduce the speakers in great detail because some details were available in the initial publicity. Spyridoula Fotinis, on a shorter timescale, has also been involved when she worked at the Greek Archdiocese in North America at the intersection of faith and the public sphere, and has produced some educational programs online on environmental action for parishes and families, and is now studying public policy in Helsinki. Sister Theokritoff, representing the Chrysopihi monastery under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, that's in Western Crete. And this monastery is a living example of an integration of faith and ecological living, and also runs environmental programs, which she'll talk about. Edward Skidelsky from Exeter University is coming at these questions from something of a different angle, as a lecturer in philosophy with a particular interest in moral and political philosophy. And this is important because the Orthodox approach, for which ascetic life is so central as a model, often comes up against objections that, oh, well, you're ignoring the realities of politics and economics. Consumption makes the world go round. Well, Edward is the author of several books and articles dealing with questions of economics, money, markets, and human happiness. And I think will show us that there is quite a convergence between ascetic and other approaches on these questions. So I would like to ask Costa Carras, please, to start us off. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Because I have a note here. Oh, yes, good. Now you have released me. Well, I will start by saying a very warm thank you to you, Elizabeth. We go back a long way together to the time when in the Diocese of Suraj, we started discussing the involvement of Christians, Orthodox Christians in particular, with the outside world. And I think it's very much to your credit and in your tradition that you should have organized this meeting today. My purpose is to bind together the past and the future. The beginnings of Orthodox involvement are in fact quite early. I'm not going to start saying earlier than many other churches, but certainly early. And they go back to the late Metropolitan Anthony of Suraj's persuasion of the British Council of Churches to hold a series of meetings on Trinitarian doctrine. At that time, you wouldn't believe it, John Zizoulas, now Metropolitan of Pergamon, was not even included in the panel from the Diocese of Theatru, the Greek Orthodox Diocese, and he was included in Metropolitan Antony's list. He came to London frequently for meetings, and although, of course, the main subject of that commission was Trinitarian doctrine, and he was the main participant who guided the vast majority of our Protestant colleagues to see that the filioque was not correct theology. We, in our private meetings, continually discuss the ecological crisis, which, or rather, not which, the climate aspects of which had begun to emerge clearly at the end of the decade of the 70s and became absolutely demonstrable in the course of the decade of the 80s. In the course of the decade of the 80s, John Zizoulis became Metropolitan John of Pergamon, and when the opportunity was given to me as an archon of the ecumenical throne to organize a conference which would not be strictly theological in 1988, on the 900th anniversary of the foundation of the monastery of St. John the Theologian in Patmos, I recommended to the Ecumenical Patriarchate that it should be a pan-religious conference on the attitudes of religion to the twin crises, and I emphasize twin crises, of climate change and biodiversity. That took place. I had nothing to do with the teaching. The teaching that emerged was a great contribution of Metropolitan John of Pergamon. What I had to do was the organization, the invitation of Buddhists, Jews. Yehudi Menuhin was the most prominent Jew, the late Yehudi Menuhin, Hindus, Muslims, the Muslim Council at the last moment, all the various Christian churches. And it was that meeting which recommended to the Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to choose a day of prayer for God's creation. The late Patriarch Demetrius accepted that proposal, and it was under him that the 1st of September was chosen. What we did not anticipate was that within 3 years after two subsequent conferences at Ormilia and Colimbari in Crete, both of which I attended, together with other members of Elliniki Etairia, the newly elected Patriarch Bartholomeus would take up the ball and run hard and very impressively, bringing together the scientific and the theological communities into a common platform. That was a great achievement. And I think I can safely say that although other groups of Christians had already started to concern themselves with this issue, this was a first, the meetings of scientists and theologians that came from the Ecumenical Patriarchate. We did not anticipate with Metropolitan John that it would be easygoing, and it wasn't. But the fact remains that there was some progress, and I will, despite the fact that the Church of Greece, traditionally and particularly under Archbishop Christodoulos, did not much like the Ecumenical Patriarchate. In the Orthodox world, as you all know, bishops have a great deal of leeway. And so how much progress there was depended on the local bishop. But to a smaller and very significant degree, it depended on local parish priests. Now it so happens that I think, I may be wrong, unparalleled experience in running public opinion polls in Greece on the attitude of ordinary people to ecological issues, and more specifically climate change. The last one was in 2019. The next one is coming up next year, 2022. I did several in the course of the decade 2000 to 2010. Going back to 2000, 2010, climate change was not high on the agenda. It was there, but it was not high on the agenda compared with other ecological problems. What, however, was most impressive was that although the public influence of the church as a whole was down to 19%, effectively the same as the political parties, which were 20%, what was extremely impressive, and I had a specific question asked about this, is that over 2/3, 14 out of that 19%, listened to their parish priests more than to their bishops. And that I was able to confirm when we had a focus group of young people aged 18 to 25. And because I was the organizer, I was allowed to witness it from behind a screen, one-way mirror. And 2 of the young women, out of a total focus group of 7, specifically said they had heard their parish priests preach on the issue of ecology and the environment. So it bore out the fact that the message was getting through to some degree. Of course, you could answer that that is from amongst the 20% whom the church reached. Yes, that is correct. And that is, of course, a very major point, that the consumer society dominates Greece, as every other Western country, and 20% is a comparatively low percentage. But it is not an insignificant percentage. In our last public survey, which was in 2019, climate change dominated the ecological agenda, and in fact, it was now above biodiversity, much above biodiversity, because the climatic crisis is a dual crisis. It's a crisis of climate change and a crisis of biodiversity. Very, very large interest. Interestingly enough, less in the 15 to 17 age group, which now we were polling, than in somewhat older age groups. That was a very interesting, not very happy for us response, but the overwhelming fact is that people are very well aware of the problem in at least one Orthodox country, with very, very large figures indeed, over 50%. So much for the past. I think, however, that past is very interesting because it shows that the work done by the Ecumenical Patriarchate and by innumerable local parish priests and some bishops has, in fact, had an effect within the Orthodox world. It is not right to say that we may be behind or we may be ahead. This is irrespective. We are nowhere near where we need to be. That is not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the effort that began in 1988 has borne fruit. Now I turn to the future, more briefly. The crisis, climate change, has become in all parts of the world a climate crisis, and in some parts of the world, climate collapse. And the parts of the world in which it is climate collapse are, on the whole, the poorest or the physically disadvantaged, by which I mean areas where the sea level was really high and so forth. Therefore, we are now facing a different situation. One thing has not changed. It is, I think, contrary to the Orthodox ethos that things should be laid down centrally by some central authority. Every believer has a responsibility to God and a responsibility to his fellow men and women to act in such a way, personally, as to help them face a crisis which is greater for them than it is for him or herself. That seems to me to be the fundamental principle. And Metropolitan John of Pergamon, and he's rewriting it again in the volume for the 50 years of Elliniki, Etairia, the organization which organized the 1988 conference, places the fall, what we call the fall of humankind, directly in consequence of human beings, overwhelming tendency over the many centuries of history to place himself or herself at the center of creation instead of God. Metropolitan John argues that that is why God's Son became incarnate. And he has created a way back. But that way back has, of course, to be taken. and it is something which is the challenge for each one of us. The challenge is partly personal life. The challenge is largely of working together with others, Christians and non-Christians, in such a manner as to help those who need help, to allow those countries which still need to grow to do so, and to restrain our own consumption in relation to that. I believe that my time is just about up. And that being so, I pass the floor.
Thank you very much, Costa. I hope we will hear from you again later in the discussion. So I'd now like to ask Spyridoula Fotinis.
Thank you. First, thank you also echoing for inviting me, and Dr. Elizabeth, who's a dear family friend as well, but also a very inspirational figure, I think, as well, because I've seen you through the years growing up, like also very much practicing the environmental ethos of the Orthodox Church, and to Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies, which it's nice to see all of you virtually again after visiting a couple of years ago for summer school. And also I'm really excited to be here with the rest of the panelists, so thank you. I'm going to speak a bit more from the American context, and as was mentioned in the beginning, I am indeed no longer in the United States, but I'm in Finland right now studying, so I just moved here a few months ago, but the American context is what I know very well and would like to share about as well. So to begin, I received an email a couple of days ago, and the headline of the email from a Interfaith environmental organization that maybe some of you are also subscribed to was, "Hope is not a strategy for climate justice, resistance is." And that made me pause for a minute, because for me, a lot of times, hope is the thread that continues to be through this crisis and this climate change thing. I mean, even here in Finland right now, we're experiencing a huge change in weather every day. It gets very cold, very warm, so we see it in our daily lives. And as I was going through the Glasgow Climate Pact and reading about COP26, I sat there and also lost hope, because me as a young adult thought, where am I going to be in the future? If I want to have kids, where are they going to be in the future? And honestly, it's very scary. It's difficult to read about how the negotiations try to get to a certain point, but then at the last minute, different languages changed or lessened or weakened in some way. And so really for me, it's thinking, this is not enough. What are we doing more? And then the second question while I was reading all these things was, what does this mean for me as an Orthodox Christian? How do I fit into this? And how do we as the church fit into this dialogue, these crises that are happening, and what it means to be an Orthodox Christian and witness to that? And really thinking about, how do we take this information? How do we take our theology, this ethos we have, and how we practice our faith and kind of speak with the world to the world, because we are still part of the world, at least I am, in different ways. So where do we even begin? I think it's a little bit daunting of a task. And I really appreciated Mr. Carras's presentation, because for me, when I worked at the Department of Inter-Orthodox Ecumenical Interfaith Relations of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the United States, I was not aware of the work of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to the depth that I became aware. I was really blessed to be part of the Green Attica Symposium as a young college undergraduate student. But as I learned about the history of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the conference that you, Mr. Carras, organized, when you were speaking about it, I was thinking about all the history I read. So it's very incredible to see you present and share about that. But I was really stunned by how much the church has been involved. And at least in the United States, that has not been a conversation, at least in my parish or among my peers. So as a young adult, to me, it said the church has been involved in this issue in society. Why are we not seeing it? Why are we not talking about it? And as I continued to learn more about this, there was key moments that there were 3 young women that started to make this issue come alive again for the Archdiocese and for the department. So in the past, our department always wanted to do more on the environment because of the work of His All Holiness, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. And since our office had status in the United Nations, we always engaged in different ways on the environment at the UN. But on the parish level, we weren't able to kind of bring anything to fruition. So in December of 2019, 3 young women contacted me all separately, and they were each working on different projects in their parishes on the environment and wanted to see where the Archdiocese could bring them further and what the church was doing. I think someone was unmuted. So these three women helped us to really begin, once again, to look at how is the church responding to this issue in the United States, and how are we engaging our young people and people in our churches who are passionate in doing this work. So this started what is called the Greening the Parish project series, and we started in January of this year, 2021, with a 4-part webinar series that I know some people on the Zoom call were a part of. So I'm grateful to see you all here again as well. But these 4 webinars were a way to start the conversation once again. So the first one focused on Orthodox initiatives and really brought people, again, mostly from a United States context, to talk about what's happening in the church, how do we understand these issues, and what is the Orthodox theology and practice behind it. Then the second one focused on ecumenical practices. So again, working with other Christians and understanding what are they also doing. The third one was communities at work. So trying to understand more of the practical implementation and how that happens in different faith groups. And then the last one was hopeful aspirations. And this one brought a panel of all young people, all Orthodox Christians in the United States that were doing different work. And I would say that was the most chill and fun panel, because we really talked as young adults to another, we really talked about some of these issues and how we see the church responding to this in the future and currently. So all of this really set off what then became the Greening the Parish resource page, which I will post in the chat in a little bit. And this page has all the encyclicals for September 1st for the prayer of the protection and preservation of the natural environment from 1989 to the current one. It also has an Orthodox Christian creation care toolkit and a lot of other resources from also ecumenical and interfaith partners. So the idea was we want to offer, since we at the Archdiocese have kind of a top level approach of, we have all these parishes that we minister to, how can we offer one page where people can go to find the resources they need to do this in their parishes. So this is what this page brought together, and it's a really, really well done page, thanks to our Internet Ministries team. But with all of this, it's really good to give resources, but then the next piece, and kind of what the question leading this webinar tonight is the practical implementation. What does it mean, again, to be an Orthodox Christian, to be a human being in this world, and actually work and do things that also protect and preserve our environment? So instead of doing more webinars, we decided as a way to engage people in our parishes and to really understand what people are doing on the parish level, we invited people to do how-to videos. So these were 2 to 3 minute videos that, again, many of you on this call had done a video. And these different videos focused on from the theological approach all the way to the practical. So for example, there's videos about 5 things to do today at your parish to make it more green, to make it more sustainable. There's one on monasticism and creation, one about insects and how important insects are, another one on the liturgical cycle, another one on the pan-Orthodox concern for animals, and some of the other ones on waste. And one of my favorite ones, I think, is a parish example of St. Anna in Roseville, California, where they grow their own grapes, they have their own fruit trees, they make the communion wine from their grapes, they have palm trees in the back, so they make palms for Palm Sunday, and they also have their own bees and make their own honey. I'll post the video in the chat. But it's really incredible that we did not know this was happening. So by reaching out and actually starting this conversation, we started to see what our parishes were doing and how people were engaging. So these how-to videos right now, there's 24 out there. There's going to be about 40 published by the end of the year. And every week they're published on the Archdiocese web pages. So it's a way for people to engage and see what other people are doing, and then also start this conversation even further. We want people to feel encouraged to know what's happening, how they can do it, and also providing it in really small ways. So with all of this, the project is also in the future, they're working on creating the Greening the Parish certificate, which will be very cool to kind of encourage parishes as a whole to engage with this issue, and then also look to other examples that may be around them in the United States. So why does this all matter, and how does this all work? I think it's really important that these are small things. As we talked about, there's so many large corporations and things that are also contributing to this crisis. And sometimes it's very easy to feel that what I do is a very small level thing and doesn't matter. But I think from this project, I learned that it does matter. And we need to really witness as Orthodox Christians, but again, as human beings in our daily lives in everything that we do. And one of my greatest takeaways was also learning a lot about waste and how to approach this topic of climate change. As was kind of mentioned, it can be very politicized, especially in the United States, where this will also tear people apart in our parishes. So instead, it's approaching the issue maybe from something we can all agree on, for example, waste, and look at our garbage cans and say, what am I throwing out? How can I throw out less? Or how can I change my habits to make a little bit less waste? So starting in these small ways is really important, because if we don't start there, we can't grow from there. And I think also at the same time, it's understanding what is happening in the world, and also the lobbying and the climate justice stuff is important. We need to also engage wherever we feel called and where God has provided a space for us to also offer what he has given us. And I think really bringing these two together is a good way to witness of what we have to bring to the world. So I started with this approach that the question that I saw in the email was that hope is not the answer. But I believe that hope is the answer, because as Mr. Carras said too, we have a God who gave us the ultimate hope. So I think we have to try just a little bit to make it happen and make the creation that he has given us actually continue to live and grow and prosper. So thank you as well, and I'll close my mic and hand it to the next person.
Thank you very much indeed, Spyridoula. It's wonderful to hear these examples, and particularly to hear very impressive examples of parishes, because that seems to be quite rare. Perhaps there are more of them that we're not aware of. What we see more of is monasteries which set remarkable examples, and we're about to hear of one outstanding one from Sister Theokritoff. Thank you very much for being with us, and please, the floor is yours. Unmute yourself, please, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. First, we would like to thank Dr. Elizabeth for inviting our monastery to participate in this IOCS Conversation Day, and the Institute itself for hosting the event. Now, for over 35 years now, our convent, the Holy Monastery of Chrysopygi in Chania, Crete, has worked systematically in the fields of environmental protection and education, sustainable historical building and landscape restoration, while applying in practice in everyday life of the sisterhood, organic farming methods and other principles of sustainability. The environmental action of our monastery corresponds with the initiatives of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the vision of His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, who of course is known as the Green Patriarch and has been mentioned already. Now, the authentic lived experience of the Orthodox Church and its monastic tradition is an ascetic and Eucharistic use of the material world. With the ascetic, that is the moderate and reasonable use of things, the integrity of creation is preserved, and man offers doxology and thanksgiving, which is due to the Creator. In the Orthodox monasticism, this ascetic and Eucharistic ethos forms the very basis for all actions and activities of daily life. The gospel call to ascetic perfection guides a monk or a nun along a path of prayer, love, and work, which in the monastery is service to the community, the church, and the world, always meaningful, always a shared blessing. And this essentially ascetic and Eucharistic path leads him or her to reconciliation with the Creator and the whole created world. Thus, in the face of the current climate crisis, monasticism, when it is authentic and spirit-bearing, becomes a dynamic witness, a tangible example of the use of the world that is sustainable and salvific, while at the same time revealing and manifesting the sacredness of the world and of human life. The monastery of Chrysopygi comprises two large monastic areas. The first area is of about 25 acres. It surrounds the restored historical monastery of Chrysopygi dating from the 16th century and is situated on the south edge of the city. On the initiative of the monastery, the area has been acknowledged and classified as a Class A preservation zone, and thus the natural surroundings of the old monastery have been protected and now constitute the precious lung for the city of Chania. The second monastic area of our monastery, situated just outside of the city, is a preservation precinct surrounding Saint Kyriaki, an old dependency of Chrysopygi, and Metamorphosis, our new monastic complex. Next to Saint Kyriaki, here you can also see the monastery's environmental education center, which will be mentioned later, and that small whitish structure to the right, yes, to the right from Metamorphosis is a stone-built church, soon to be completed, dedicated to Saint Porphyrios of Kafsokalivia. This monastic preservation precinct is a woodland area of about 150 acres with many natural caves and rich biodiversity. Now, in both of the monastic areas, we cultivate our land only according to the organic farming methods, it being the most sustainable and also the traditional mode of land cultivation. When our monastery had just started organic farming, which was now almost 4 decades ago, it was still a novel idea and generally unknown in Greece. It was then that the contemporary saint of our church, Saint Porphyrios of Kafsokalivia, who was a spiritual guide of our sisterhood, as well as of many other monastic communities in Greece and abroad, was encouraging Mother Theosemni, the first abbess of Chrysopygi, and explained scientifically the benefits of organic farming, both to the environment and to the human health, always stressing the spiritual dimension of such choice. The organic olive oil of Chrysopygi, which is produced in larger quantities, is placed on the market with appropriate packaging and labels which inform and educate the consumer about organic farming, its vital importance for health, as well as its spiritual significance. Now, I would like to talk more about our second monastic center, the preservation precinct of Saint Kyriaki and Metamorphosis. In this area, our goal is to keep structured and unstructured spaces in harmonious balance, creating a unified whole. In the years from 1992 to 1996, the small dependency of Saint Kyriaki, a building dating from the 17th century, was restored by our community. Special care was taken to preserve its original configuration and to recreate its traditional architecture. Later, the new Catholicon of the monastery dedicated to the transfiguration of our Lord, Metamorphosis, was erected on a rocky prominence further up the hill. Designed to merge harmoniously with the surrounding landscape, these new monastic buildings have an exceptionally low ecological footprint. They were built exclusively with the stones from their own site's excavation, according to both the traditional building techniques and the principles of bioclimatic architecture, and now are served by renewable energy systems, namely the solar thermal and the solar photovoltaic ones. New trees that are being planted at Metamorphosis are watered with the outflow from a small organic waste treatment unit installed on site. These same building principles are also used and followed in the ongoing construction of the Church of Saint Porphyrios, and we hope that in the future we will be able to rebuild in, of course, the same manner, a small church dedicated to the Holy Trinity. Its ruins lie in the archaeological site of Kastelos, further up from Metamorphosis, and our monastery has already prepared a study for its restoration, so we'll see what will happen. Now, the same monastic preservation precinct is also where the botanical garden of aromatic and medicinal plants was created. This open-air botanical garden includes over 100 local plant and herb species, all of which are marked with a name label containing a QR code, which a visitor can use to obtain more information about that particular plant. Now, biodiversity and cultural heritage preservation in this monastic precinct is a question that concerns both its environmental value and its sanctity. This is why our community devotes great effort to protect and preserve it. With the prohibition of hunting, this natural habitat became a refuge for birds, while preventing unauthorized goat and sheep grazing allowed not only for the regeneration of the flora, but also for the restoration of some of the old cave chapels, as in the past they were used as sheepfolds by local shepherds. Because of course, the other characteristic feature of this area is its caves. Some of them had been transformed into chapels centuries ago, and some in more recent years. And now these caves can be accessed by stone-paved pathways and stairways that connect them with St. Kyriaki, Metamorphosis, and the Botanical Garden. From what I know, Elliniki Etairia, which Mr. Carras has briefly mentioned, has proposed a study for continuation of these paths in the wider area further up from where Metamorphosis is, and we'll hope that will become a reality. The other key element of our monastery's environmental action is education. The sisterhood organizes activities for school and university students, camp leaders, and other groups of young people. This continued initiative, something we have been doing for over 15 years now, aims at increasing young people's environmental awareness, as well as allowing them to explore the rich heritage of Orthodox tradition. The educational programs and activities are based at the monastery's Environmental Education Center, and hundreds of young people participate in them every year. The center is housed in the restored stone building next to St. Kyriaki and was officially inaugurated by His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew in 2012. Young people and children who visit the Environmental Education Center using info kiosks and through other interactive activities can learn about the protection of the environment and its relation to the tradition of the Orthodox Church. But what is most important is that besides obtaining theoretical knowledge, these young people can experience the sacredness of creation. They walk the stone-paved pathways, they come to the cave chapels for the Divine Liturgy, they drink from natural springs of water, they plant trees, they explore the botanical garden and discover the natural wealth of their own place. They learn about unique properties of various trees, herbs, and flowers, or they voluntarily work preparing compost, harvesting fruits or olives, and so on. The effort of raising environmental awareness and imparting ecological practices through organizing educational programs, talks, and events is also addressed to other monastics, young female farmers, and many other people from Greece and abroad who visit our monastery. However, something that is very essential to these efforts is the cultivation of a specific ethos within the sisterhood itself. And ethos here refers both to understanding and a mode of living. To put it another way, the sisterhood, which communicates with people from all over the world, is cultivated in such a way that it could give a message of the true meaning of monasticism, which is both an angelic life and at the same time a dynamic reality in this world. Central to this are our young novices and sisters who come from distant parts of the world, such as Korea, Colombia, Uganda, or Madagascar. They come to learn the way of Orthodox monastic life, and later, establishing new monastic communities in their countries, they build their monasteries according to what they have learned at Chrysopiyi, thus spreading the spirit further to the local people there. In Africa alone, there are already 4 young monastic communities that were started by the novices of Chrysopiyi. Of course, one could speak of one more side of raising these sisters and then supporting their new communities in Africa, which is helping people to stay, grow, and establish themselves on their own land at their home. This, of course, is a crucial issue for sustainability and environmental tactics when it comes to migration. The Sisterhood of Chrysopiyi lives out the virtue of philanthropy, not only in the sense of charitable giving to people in need, but also by safeguarding the natural environment and the cultural heritage, because it is exactly this which the sisterhood considers to be the greatest form of philanthropy, not only for the next generation of the monastics, but for all coming generations. The call to Christian ascetic life, embodied in monasticism, continues in the Orthodox Church for 2000 years now. The Lord's words, "Whosoever desires to come after me," are timeless. But the call to monastic life has probably never been as timely and relevant as in our days. Here, with the ascetic way of life and emphasis on wakefulness and vigilance, the theology of our church is lived out in everyday life, and this perishable world, though oppressed due to the current climate crisis, is sanctified and brings a foretaste of the kingdom to come. In these critical times for our planet, the witness of monasticism can awaken people's conscience and offer criteria, both spiritual and practical, for the use of the world that is sustainable and salvific. And today, perhaps as never before, is the hour when the true meaning of monasticism could be understood. Thank you.
Yes, Sister Theokritoff, thank you very much indeed for that wonderful, inspiring presentation. That certainly is a vision of the good life. And our last speaker, Edward Skidelsky, is also, I think, going to talk to us about understanding of the good life, probably with quite a few points of convergence. So, Edward, please.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you for organising this. I think my excuse for being here, as it were, is a book I wrote about 10 years ago, together with my father, Robert, called "How Much Is Enough? Money and the Good Life," and it's essentially an ethical case for economic degrowth. So we argue in this book that we in the Western world collectively have enough, meaning enough to lead a good life, and that therefore economic growth should no longer be an overriding priority. Now, I wasn't Orthodox when I wrote the book. I was a rather lukewarm Anglican, and it's not written from a explicitly Christian or religious point of view. But nonetheless, I think it does contain many themes which chime with what previous speakers have said. There's one chapter in the book particular which I think caught Elizabeth's attention, where we talk about another argument for degrowth, namely the environmental argument, and try to work out what our attitude towards it is, limits to growth, natural or moral, the chapter is called. And we wrote this chapter really in order to correct what we regarded as a troubling bias in a lot of contemporary environmentalist thought. This thought is covertly or sometimes overtly misanthropic. So it represents man as the defiler of a nature which is in itself innocent and beautiful. And of course, this sentiment goes back to the Romantics of the 19th century. Many of you probably know Gerard Manley Hopkins's wonderful poem, "The World is Charged with the Grandeur of God," which continues after having celebrated the glory of creation. Why do men then not now wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel, being shod. So a very powerful expression of yes, human self-disgust, really. And in a similar vein, Wordsworth lamented the outrage done to nature by machine production and called on nature to avenge her violated rights. And many other similar passages can be found in the works of Ruskin, Thoreau, Emerson, and other 19th century romantics and critics. And today, these views have really become part of our cultural makeup, at least in the Western part of the world. So advertisers can be sure of enhancing the appeal of a product simply by calling it natural, organic, unspoilt. By contrast, terms such as artificial, synthetic, or engineered are guaranteed turn-offs. Disney cartoons inevitably represent animals as the innocent victims of rapacious human beings. Think of Bambi and many others following it. Our son, our 9-year-old son, subscribes to a magazine called The Week Junior, right? This is a popular magazine for children in the UK. And I've noticed it devotes 4 whole pages every week to the natural world, usually with a view to pointing out how it's being destroyed by human beings. So these ideas are part of our surrounding culture. We breathe them in the atmosphere. What does all this mean? In a word, it means that environmentalism has become our religion. An age without faith in a transcendent God looks to nature as the only remaining check upon our insatiable appetites. Voltaire famously said, if God did not exist, we would have to invent him. If climate crisis didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And pronouncements on it have exactly the same flavour of piety and good intentions as used to characterise a certain kind of Anglican sermon. This new religion of nature is crystallised in the concept of Gaia, pioneered by scientist James Lovelock. Early in his career, Lovelock noticed that living creatures play a crucial role in maintaining the Earth's temperature and atmosphere in a state hospitable to life. And this led him to wonder whether the Earth as a whole might not be thought of as a self-regulating system, akin to an organism. He mentioned his hunch to the novelist, William Golding, who happened to be a neighbour of his, who, without hesitation, recommended that this creature be called Gaia, after the Greek earth goddess. And so a new myth was born. Now, Gaia was first proposed by Lovelock as a purely heuristic device, a way of framing hypotheses, not as a literal statement of fact. Occasionally, it has been difficult, without extensive circumlocution, to avoid talking of Gaia as if she were known to be sentient, he wrote in 1978. But this is meant no more seriously than is the appellation she, when given to a ship by those who sail her. But in more recent writings of Lovelock, this caveat has vanished. What if Mary is another name for Gaia, he asks rhetorically in The Ages of Gaia. On earth, she is the source of life everlasting and is alive now. She gave birth to humankind and we are part of her. So I think we can see Lovelock playing a double game here. On the one hand, reassuring his scientific colleagues, and on the other, giving the nod to the neo-pagans. Gaia, respectably naturalistic, yet rich in mythical undertones, is a divinity tailor-made for an age incapable of transcendent faith. Gaia's message is ambiguous. If she is robust, a tough old bitch, as Lovelock's collaborator Lynn Margulis has called her, then perhaps she can accommodate everything we throw at her. After all, she's been accommodating disturbances throughout her long history. But perhaps she's not so robust anymore, or perhaps her accommodation of this particular disturbance will take the form of removing its source, namely ourselves. Lovelock's recent book, The Revenge of Gaia, favours this latter possibility. Here, Gaia is no longer the Virgin Mary, mild and tender, but a pagan fury. He writes, "We now see that the great earth system, Gaia, behaves like other mythical goddesses, Kali and Nemesis. She acts as a mother who is nurturing but ruthlessly cruel towards transgressors, even when they are her progeny." And with this, I think, prophecy has finally triumphed over science. Lovelock's catastrophic vision has no empirical foundation. Its logic is mythopoetic. Man's misdeeds call out for vengeance, and God being dead, nature must wield the sword. It was in this spirit that the Victorian naturalist G.P. Marsh spoke of nature avenging herself upon the intruder. Such rhetoric is not only bad science, it is more importantly bad religion. Nature, as conceived by her modern devotees, cares only for her own balance, not for the good of man. She inherits God's wrath, but not his mercy. Gaia marks a retrogression, not an evolution in religious consciousness. I mean, it's effectively a reversion to a form of paganism. And I think it's just here that Christians can make an original and useful contribution to the debate on the environment, rather than simply trying to catch up apologetically with the secular orthodoxy. Because for us, human beings are not a blight on the face of Gaia, as James Lovelock likes to represent them. We are the crown of creation, made in the image and likeness of our Creator. Now, this is not, of course, to say that nature is ours to do with as we will, a great machine given to man to be fashioned to his purpose, as the 19th century American economist H.C. Carey put it. This is a view that is, I think, quite common, particularly among a lot of Anglo-Saxon Protestants, probably following in the footsteps of Locke. No, nature has a value which is independent of our interests. Nonetheless, it is only in and through us that this value reveals itself. Without us, it would be blind and mute. And I think you can perhaps see a symbol of this truth in the Genesis story of Adam's naming of the animals. So just as Adam names each animal with the name that already truly belongs to it, so it is our vocation and our privilege to recognize and name the value which is already there in nature as God's creation, to reveal and manifest the sacredness of the world, as Sister Theokritoff just put it beautifully in her talk. Yeah, I'll conclude that. I think this is I just want to highlight that contribution that we Christians, and perhaps particularly we Orthodox Christians, can make to the modern debate on the environment.
Thank you very much indeed, Edward, and all of you. We now have time for discussion. Have we?
7:30. Half an hour.
Yes, I'm wondering if there are questions in the chat. First, I'd like to ask first if panelists would like to respond to what other panelists have said. Is anyone? Costa, yes, please. Unmute. I think you have to unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself, Costa?
Okay.
Yes, yes, fine.
Thank you. I've been deeply impressed by what I've heard and seen, and I want to make two comments. First of all, the first one is to correct a mistake that I made at the end of my own presentation, and it was a mistake which was natural because I was rushing to finish in time. But still, it's very important to put it right. When Metropolitan John of Pergamon gave his first presentation of an Orthodox theology of creation in 1988, and ever since, he has not only emphasized the negative side, that is to say, the side of human beings making ourselves the center of creation himself, but also the positive side of human beings as the priests of creation, following on Jesus Christ, the Messiah himself. And that is very important to remember, and it certainly fits very well with the points which were just made now by Edward Skidelsky. The second thing I would like to say is that we saw a wonderful example of what acting as priests of creation can be from the presentation by Sister Theokritoff. I'm deeply grateful to her for that presentation. And I believe that there are some other sisterhoods in particular. I know of the sisterhoods, there may be brotherhoods too, which have been carrying out the same sort of work, and I speak only of Greece, which is where I now live. However, in answer to the initial question, which we were given from Hieromonk Michael, I would like to say that although this is indeed a crucial moment for the witness of Orthodox monasticism, it is also regrettably a time when quite a lot of monastic communities are self-satisfied. They make use increasingly of the creature comforts of the surrounding world, but they express a theology and a spirituality which is not one of priests of creation, but is one of satisfaction in possessing the truth almost against others. So I would answer his question by saying that it is very crucial to determine which path one is following as a monastic community, if one is a member of a monastic community, because I, in my experience over the last 30 years, have seen both. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, just to clarify, this was a response to the question which was submitted in advance by Hieromonk Michael. There was also a question submitted in advance by Christina Nellist. How?
Perhaps you could put this.
Yes, I don't, Christina, it seems to me that the whole discussion was trying to answer that, but I don't know if you have something more specific questions still.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Oh, I wasn't prepared to actually say anything, but the key point here, I mean, we know our history, or I think everyone on this call will know how our patriarchs have spoken, how the patriarchs and the hierarchs have said very good things, but Certainly in my experience, traveling in the different Orthodox countries, and it seems to be the case in some recent discussions that others that are on this panel have had, is that there seems to be very little going on, certainly in England. We can see from Spyridoula and the work over there that there seems to be quite a bit going on. But, you know, how are we to get this actively taught in our parishes? Because there's no time given for discussion. You know, the congregation come in, we go through the liturgy, etc., and then everybody leaves. There's not a great deal going on. I can speak for Cyprus as well, but I won't go on, because the key point, the key question is, how do we actually get what Spyridoula was saying? How do we actually get this working in the local parish? It's not as if there isn't stuff there. So what is stopping us? What is it? That's the question, really. A very practical question.
If I can briefly comment as well. I just posted another link in the chat, and I think that's one of the questions that we struggled with the most. And part of my brainstorming, I guess, when I was transitioning out of my position to move to Finland was, how do you keep the sustainability going of these programs and things? And I think seeing on the parish level, it really takes key people that are willing to go through ups and downs and a lot of different opinions to really continue to push it forward. So the link I just posted in the chat was these two women from a parish in California, actually the most recent how-to videos about their parish. I think it's St. Seraphim's in California, where they just like very slowly talked about how they were reducing waste at home, how they can reduce waste in their parish. And then they built this how to green their local parish guide. So instead of it being like this very large scale thing, it was, how are we at home doing it? How can we in our parish do it by very simply, for example, using ceramic plates instead of styrofoam plates at coffee hour that we have in the parish. And then they slowly were able to get the support of other parishioners. But obviously there's resistance, right? Like that was something we were always facing with. There's people that are willing to do it, but there will always be resistance of some sort, unfortunately. So it's just, I think, finding like-minded people in the parish. And also I think one of our ideas was really to engage young adults to act as ambassadors, so to speak, in the parishes and really try to push that through. But then they also need support, either from the hierarchs or institutionally or from their parish priest as well. But I think this is a good example of, if someone is willing to do it, it is possible. And I think people working together and knowing what's happening across the country or the world can then encourage others to do more. So definitely check out the guide. I think they did a really good job of approaching the issue without also making it very political and actually engaging everyone in their parish.
Are we muted?
No.
Yes. Thank you very much, Spyridoula. Without sounding too self-advertising, I would say that if everybody who's listening actually talks to other people in their parish, including their parish priest, unless they are the parish priest, about events such as this seminar or the Volos seminar, which I think we've got a link to in the chat, that happened a few weeks ago. Lots of really good practical things that Orthodox churches in other countries are doing. That's a good start, because the material written online, what have you, on orthodoxy and environment is, as you know, Christina, I mean, there's plenty of it there if people only want to look at it. So I think just hammering away, talking about these things is a very important place to start. We've got, there was a question from, oh gosh, that's a long question, from James Kruger, if people can see it in the chat, about strange environmental bedfellows. Can you go down so that I can see the I mean, I'm not quite sure how to deal with a question which is a mini essay, but I think what James Kruger is pointing out is that there are strange environmental bedfellows, which he calls hostile towards nature, and that the church has an alternative approach. I mean, this certainly, I don't know whether anybody on the panel, yes, Edward, if you'd like to comment, please. I think you have to unmute.
Oh, yes.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting comment, and I think it is significant that at the same time that we sentimentalize non-human nature, we at the same time have lost any sense of human nature. And I think those two tendencies must be connected at some level.
Here's another question from Jeremy Ingpen, mainly
Yes.
for Edward.
Yes, can you see that in the chat, Edward? We think of the shift as one to a luxury economy in which we in the West no longer dump our waste into the developing world, but take full responsibility for the cost of recycling, etc. And this will end our low-cost feasting on cheap goods. Yeah.
So if either
Yeah.
Edward.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I am in fully. I mean, I'm in full sympathy with that thought. Yeah.
We have some new messages. That's the
Daniel Moran. So I'll just read, just to make it easier. Daniel's question is, well, basically referring to James's comment above. He agrees with them. Many of the fellow travelers in the environmental movement and the specific issues that attach to environmental advocacy are concerning. How can we overcome this skepticism about ecological matters? This is a question for the entire panel and indeed for, I suppose, all the participants.
If nobody is about to jump in, I would actually like to ask Costa if you have thoughts on this, because you have an awful lot of experience of working with a very wide range of people and finding common ground, perhaps secular more than neo-pagan, but do you have thoughts on this?
You have.
Yes.
Yes. I think the point is well taken. I have more experience of dealing with secularists than I do with this sort of thinking that Edward is referring to, but I certainly don't deny that it exists, and I strongly feel that we have a real task to distinguish ourselves from neo-pagan ideas like Gaia, and simultaneously with very fundamental ideas to Western secular civilization, which are that the earth is there to be taken over and ruled by us. So we need to distinguish ourselves from both, but it is important to distinguish that through practice as well as in theological debate, or if you wish, philosophical debate. It's extremely important that people get the message from our lives that what we believe in is a natural world which human beings can offer to God. And look, if you simply look at what we saw from Sister Theokritoff, you can see whole areas near Chania being recreated in the image of God. It is an incredible achievement. I'm not doing it so that she should blush with shame. I'm saying it because that is indeed what, in our small way, we should all do. Elliniki, Etairia, for instance, has got a program called Footpaths of Culture, to which Sister Theokritoff actually mentioned. We were told that our services were not further required in the case of Crete. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. We can discuss it personally with Sister Theokritoff. But the point is that we have all over Greece a program in which we try to take discarded and abandoned footpaths and create from them centers of cultural and natural life, which will give inspiration from ordinary young people who simply want to walk to people who want to be in communion with nature. So there are many such projects. The monastic world gives us wonderful examples, but we obviously need to also follow up on examples in the wider world.
Thank you very much indeed, Costa. As I expect, you have given an extremely helpful and succinct and articulate answer. One thing I wanted to pick up in connection with the paths. There seems some similarity with work that Martin Palmer is now doing. Martin Palmer having been involved, I think, at the early ecological conferences with Constantinople, and has a book out, more than 10 years old, Sacred Land, and has founded the Sacred Land Trust, and which has an interest in pilgrimage routes, among other things. This seems to me something, I've only recently become aware of it, but something that Orthodox communities in England and Britain, might very well want to get involved in, given that pilgrimage and local saints are very important for many of them. And I'd also like to comment about the problem of strange ecological bedfellows. Yes, indeed, this is a problem. It becomes a problem that's much more acute in the church when people in the church, perhaps particularly young people who are very concerned about the environment, and if much of what they see in the church is a sort of exploitative approach, a lack of interest in God's creation, then they will look elsewhere. And I quite agree, Chrysopihi and a number of other monasteries are prime examples of how we respect and recognize that the sacredness of the earth, because it is God's earth. And although it has this attitude, hasn't been particularly influential, I'm afraid, in parishes, I do want to say the sort of vision of the earth that Metropolitan Anthony of Soroj had in many of his talks, again going back way before there was any talk really about environmental crisis, but he has a very strong sense of all creation serving God. It's really, it comes out of his very unclerical ecclesiology that similarly the whole of creation is seen as a worshipping community directed towards God. Perhaps I could again ask Costa, yes, please, comment.
You will first have to, yes.
Yes, I would like to bring up something which quite naturally nobody has raised. Way back in around 1800, a monk, an abbot of Neomony in Chios, which happens to be my native island, had the custom of saying to anybody who came to him for confession, plant trees. He was a theological environmentalist before the environmental movement had been thought of. Very similar stories are told more recently of Father Amphilochios of Patmos. There is deep within the Orthodox tradition a profound respect for nature as linked with God, and for us as responsible for nature towards God. And it is not therefore something new. It's not something which we thought up in the 80s or the 90s. It's something which goes way back in the deep tradition of the church. The result was that the area when I first visited Neomony, and I went by footpath, in those days there was no road, was one of the most paradisical gardens, a garden of paradise, that I have ever seen in my life. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I had no idea about this, but it's a wonderful example. And as you say, this is deep within our tradition, and yet, you know, in so many parishes, it isn't coming across. People are aware of it. Let me try and look at some more of the questions in the chat. Where does that one?
The more comments than
yes.
questions. I think we probably have time for one very short question if any of the participants would like to put now. If you can raise your hand or use the little blue hand from the reactions menu, or simply write something in the chat box.
We don't have to stop at 8 if people are still.
Yes, there's still some time to 8 anyway.
Yes. So, could you go down so that I can see the?
Of course.
Yes, about the visiting monasteries. Indeed, and you know, particularly these days where so many things happen online, and thank God we have that possibility. You know, so many people, more people are with us this evening than could have come physically to Cambridge, even without COVID restrictions. But nevertheless, online gatherings don't compare with actually being in a place, and particularly when it's a holy place. But again, one thing I thought was very inspiring and very important about Sister Theokritoff's presentation was the linkage between the sacredness of the places and their environmental richness and their value for biodiversity. And this is something that we could create more, you know, in our own homes and gardens, and also in our parishes, churches that own their own building, perhaps have some sort of land around them, can, on a smaller scale, be images of a right relationship with creation. And I think we should be thinking much more imaginatively about things that we can do in the parish level. Yes, and Christina Nellis has a comment about walking spiritually.
Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, is it Charles Hetherington? Is that a hand?
It looks
Yes.
like a hand, yes.
Yes.
I was just rather struck by Christina Nellis talking about us all trooping into church and trooping out at the other end and not having time for ecological consideration, when it seems to me that the Eucharist is at the very center of an ecological awareness, if it's understood rightly. And if only the Eucharist could come more alive to us, we would all be ecologists. Thine of thine own, we offer thee, for all and on behalf of all. Probably got that the wrong way around. That just seems to me absolutely central. So I think we are having a parish Zoom next week on the Eucharist and ecology, in fact, which I think is very important, and the awareness that the earth is God's footstool. Yes, that's the main thing I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, and you're absolutely right. But as again Christina has pointed out in the chat, it's a matter of if it's understood correctly. These are things which seem obvious once you know them, but the connections have to be made. You know, somebody has to connect the dots, and very often that isn't happening. And again, it's something that we can all do in our parishes by talking to other people. If anyone wants to make a question or comment.
There is a question. There is a raised hand from Daniel.
Yes, yes, sorry, I was going to say, because we can't see everyone on the screen, so if necessary, put a note in the chat saying you'd like to, but yes, Daniel.
Hello, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. It's very, very interesting. The comments I made earlier in the chat was the basic gist that I was trying to get to, was that there's a certain hesitancy among certain Christians, Orthodox and other confessions to really get involved in this environmental cause. And I just wanted to get the perspective of the panelists and, you know, people who commented tonight about how we can overcome that kind of skepticism from the Christian community in terms of being involved, you know, really actively involved in, you know, this environmental cause. And sometimes the main barrier to getting involved in that seems to be the fact that the fellow travelers in this kind of environmental movement do seem to be advocating for things, you know, sometimes diametrically opposed to the Christian ethos, the Orthodox ethos. And I was just wondering what the panelists thought about how we can overcome that kind of skepticism among certain Christians regarding environmental matters.
Thank you. Costa, please.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, and Daniel, if you could perhaps mute yourself. And
I'd like to thank Daniel for that point. You know, every one of us has to do what he or she can do. Now, Lydia, whom you know, Elizabeth, well, and I, next year celebrate 50 years of environmental activity with Elliniki Etairia in Greece. That was what we could do. That's what we did. Other people can do other things. We had the most wonderful example, far more impressive than anything that we have done, from Sister Theokritoff. That is a whole monastery transforming a whole region of Western Crete. And it sounds simple, but if you knew what else was happening in Western Crete, the hideousness of some of the developments, you would understand the significance of this. So my answer to the question is, first, that we all have to do what we can do. The second thing, my second answer, is that it is through what we do that we are able to give an answer to different viewpoints. And for instance, in the course of the years, we have been entrusted with the training, ecological training, of catechists in the church and the Diocese of Athens, for instance. That comes not out of the blue, but a result of a long time of being there and being prepared to do things. Now, I'm not suggesting that other people should do the same thing. That, by definition, is mistaken. And Elizabeth, you will remember me very well, way back in the 1970s, saying we should never ask our hierarchy to dictate what everyone should do. It's a huge error. There is a surplus of gifts given by God. Each one of us has our own way to tread, but we all of us have some way we can tread. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Edward.
Quickly respond to Daniel's point. Look, I think it's very important that the church should not get drawn into the political conflict between left and right. You know, to say, well, that's a left-wing position, right? Therefore, we can't touch it. I mean, for us, the question is not, is this a left-wing or a right-wing position? The question is it an authentically Christian position? And I think we can safely say it is. So we shouldn't worry about the bedfellows, as you put it.
Anyone else like to respond?
Yes, there is from Kelsey.
Kelsey, yes.
You can unmute yourself, Kelsey.
I have a question, which I've had all the way through this, is this has all been focusing on the church and the vision of the church, the vision of both the royal priesthood and the priesthood of all creation is very, very complex. It's very hard to grasp, I think, for people who don't believe in a God. And my question is, I feel we shouldn't be limited to simply thinking about the church. We need to be thinking, how can this be conveyed? How can the sacredness of creation be conveyed to people who don't believe in God and are closed to believing in God? I mean, this is a little bit like what Edward Skidelsky said. How do you deal with people who are nature lovers and feel that nature is the God? But I feel a little bit worried about our focusing only on the church, because I think how we speak to anyone, I have to speak to my grandchild and my daughter, who have moved away from the church. Well, my granddaughter never knew about it, but they have a very deep love of nature, and they have the image of God written in their hearts. But how do we convey this to them without making this a church-centered thing? Because it's great to have the monasteries do what they're doing, but not the rest of the world can't all do that.
Anyone on the panel want to respond to that? Costa, unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Kelsey, I think that there is, in our present world, there is no way in which Christians can operate on their own. We operate by working with others. And there are certain types. I mean, Edward mentioned various types of view that clearly we are opposed to. But when somebody loves nature, that is something, that's a gift of God in itself. And we must work with such people. And by our example, we hope that they may move further and closer to us. They may not, but it is our obligation to do that. I mean, in the 50 years of Etairia existence, we have worked overwhelmingly with secular and particularly Darwinist organizations, because there is no other way to work effectively. And that is what we need to do. We need to be effective as well as to bear witness. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to say, Kelsey, I mean, I absolutely appreciate your question, and it's a very important one. But at the same time, you know, there's a limit to how much one can do in 90 minutes. And that's why we start by talking about ourselves, because also you can't pass on what you aren't living. I mean, you can talk about things, and we're doing that all the time, or at least I am talking about things that I'm not fully living out. But it's so much more effective if you are living it out. And even to people who are quite sympathetic, I find it's quite difficult to talk about the beautiful Orthodox theology of creation when in so many parishes there's absolutely no glimmer of interest in even, you know, making sure that tins and plastics don't go into the rubbish. And in a way, I mean, that also brings me to a question about again, a very good and important question. People in the church put off environmentalism because this involves you with people with some very strange ideas. But I think these days, you know, there is so much awareness of actual environmental problems. You don't have to subscribe to an ideology in order to recognize that we need to do something about this. And I'm not saying, and I think most of us aren't saying, that church communities should get involved in, you know, environmental pressure groups or campaigns. If members of the church want to do that, that's up to them. That's something I learned long ago from Costa in the study group that he's mentioned, and it's a very important principle. But basically, you know, we're talking about the church communities and Christians reacting to what we know of the state of the environment. And this doesn't involve buying into anybody else's ideology. On the other hand, it may involve working on practical level with people of, you know, other Christians, pagans, people of no faith, whoever, and that isn't the problem.
I think,
sorry.
I think probably I was thinking more about finding a way to be with these people which, without telling them something, awakens in them what is essential about their love of nature. In other words, trying to, in some way, I think, as you say, certainly by the example of what you do, that's the most important of all, which is not always very easy to do. But just of learning to listen, learning to hear in the other person where what seems to us to be off key is coming from someplace in them that is true for them, if only you can open them up to it or allow them to go into it in their own way and discover it in their own way. I think it's somehow something about helping people to discover that's what is truly within themselves, listening to the voice that is true, without talking about, I think, without necessarily talking about the church.
I'm wondering, you know, I'd like to ask Sister Theokritoff if you have experience in the monastery of people coming there, perhaps without particular Christian belief, and, you know, being moved and understanding something from the way that the community lives and the ethos of the place.
Certainly. Well, of course, it's something that we see in the children that visit our monastery and come to the environmental education programs. You can see that, well, most of them really today, they come from families that don't really go to church. And coming here, as I've talked about in the presentation, they walk, they see, and everything is connected. It's not only the botanical garden or like planting a tree. There's a connection between the Orthodox faith, the visit, what they learn about nature, what they learn about protecting nature, and usually you can see. Sometimes you can see it's visible how these things work. They experience the sacredness of the place, and that works inside of them. Sometimes them not even realizing that. So you can see that very clearly with the children. There's also many other people that come to the monastery, visitors, tourists really, and they do feel touched by the place. And that's a beginning. They walk, they come to the church, and this is the seed.
I agree.
And then it's really, it's up to them and to the grace of God to really, to bring that into, to grow that really, for that to germinate, to grow, and then bring fruit. But as Saint Porphyrios of Kafsokalivia, which I've mentioned also in the presentation, and I suppose many of you might be familiar with the book with his life and his words that has been published in many languages, English including, and it's called Wounded by Love. And there he says that everything around us in this world are droplets of God's love. I think, I mean, if it is God's love, how can it not touch you if you allow it to touch you?
It's wonderful. I felt that actually watching when you were talking about it, that I would love to take my granddaughter there.
Well, you are very welcome, as all of you are, to come and visit. If you are ever here, please do. And as I suppose all Orthodox are familiar with the phrase, come and see, come and taste.
Right. Thank you very much.
Just one last thing, because I've mentioned Wounded by Love. The person who had translated this book into English is also here, if I'm not wrong.
He certainly was earlier.
Yes, well, I can't see him anymore, I suppose. He might have left. It's Father John Raffan, and he's the one that had done the translation. And some of you might know him. He's from Scotland.
Please give him greetings. I was very happy to see that he was with us, and I'm sorry that he hasn't had a chance to say hello. Does anyone else want to make a comment, ask a question? So it remains to me to thank all of you, especially our panelists, but all of you very, very much. And it's been wonderful to be with so many old and new friends. The panel has been wonderful. A particular thanks to Costa, because I know it hasn't been easy, and I deeply grateful to you for making this a priority. As you say, we go back a long way, and I must say that Costa, I mean, I owe to you very much of my commitment and understanding of both the importance of the environment in connection with orthodoxy and the way we approach this living in, as Christians living in the world. It took a while again for the dots to be connected, but finally I hope I've got the point. And so thank you very much, and many thanks to you and Sister Theokritoff and Spyridoula and Edward, who's had to go, for being on this panel with us, and to all of you listening. And many, many thanks. Please go home and talk to your parishes and recommend this. Will be, the recording will be on the IOCS website. Please recommend it to people. So many thanks and good night.